So today we're going to practice counting atoms. So when we look at a chemical formula, the first step to counting atoms is always going to be to identify the elements. So when we identify an element, we're looking for the capital letters. So in our first scenario, our capital letter is C. So we only have one element, carbon. The next step is to look for a subscript. Remember, the subscript is the little number that comes behind the element that tells me the number of atoms. In this case, I have no subscript. Now, if there is no subscript, that doesn't mean that there's no atoms. It just means that there is only one atom of that element. So please do not ever say there are 0 atoms, because if there's 0 atoms, why would I put the letter there? Now, for counting purposes, some people like in their head just to put a little 1. If you put the 1, it's okay. It's not necessary, but it's a good reminder. So in this case, we have 1 atom of carbon. Now, if we look at the next scenario, CO2. Going through the same steps, identify the elements. So we look for the capital letters. So in this one, we have carbon and we have oxygen. The next step, looking for the subscripts. So we do have a subscript. This subscript is going to tell me the number of atoms. So if I look at this model, this formula, in carbon, I don't have anything, so again, assume it to be 1. Oxygen has a subscript of 2, so it is 2. Now, the last thing that you're asked to do is total the number of atoms. So I just need to add my atoms together. So in this case, 1 plus 2, I have 3 total atoms. I have a total of 2 elements. So when we look at a chemical formula, you could be asked to identify the number of elements. You could be asked to identify the number of atoms of each individual element, or you could be asked to identify the total number of atoms. So please always read questions carefully as it relates to counting atoms. Now, our last scenario is a little bit more complicated. We're still going to go through the exact same steps, but now we have some parentheses to deal with. So the first thing I'm going to do is start out by identifying my elements. I have 1, 2, 3. So we have magnesium, Mg. We have oxygen. And we have hydrogen. The next step is to look for those subscripts. Now, I'm going to forget about this parentheses for now. For right now, I only want to look at the individual elements. I'll deal with the parentheses afterwards. So I don't see any subscripts for any of these, so I'm going to assume that they are all 1. Okay? Now, the next thing we need to do is to look at those parentheses. So in math class, you have something called the distributive property. So we're going to do the exact same thing. I want to distribute this 2 that is outside the parentheses to everything that is inside the parentheses. And when I distribute it, I need to multiply. So oxygen and hydrogen are inside the parentheses, so they will get the 2. Magnesium is not inside the parentheses, so it will not get the 2. So if we look at our totals, I have 2 oxygen now, and I have 2 hydrogen. So our total number of atoms, if we add these up, we get 5 total atoms. If we look at our elements, I have 3 total elements. So in each scenario, I was doing the same thing. First, identify the elements, then identify the number of atoms of each element based on subscripts, and finally, if I have parentheses, I have to distribute the subscript outside the parentheses to everything inside the parentheses. All right, so let's practice. So our first practice is NaC2H3O2. So we're going to go through the exact same steps, identify our elements based on the capital letters. Now, it's not necessary to write the element name like I did on the practice. what we can do is list the symbols. If it becomes a problem for you, then you need to go back and write the element names just to be correct. So I have sodium, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So in this scenario, I do not have any parentheses to worry about. So I'm going to go look just for subscripts. I have 2, 3, 2, and since I'm missing one there, I'm going to say it's 1. So for sodium, I have 1. Carbon, I have 2. Hydrogen, I have 3. And oxygen, I have 2. The last step, total these. When I add them together, we get a total of 8. Now, if I look at my number of elements, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 4 total elements. One more practice. Al2SO43. So this time we do have parentheses, so we've got to go through all the steps. First, identifying your elements. I have Al, S, and I have O. I'm going to forget about the parentheses right now. I only want to look at individual elements. I have a 2, I have nothing there, and I have a 4. So we're going to assume that this is 1. So if my Al is 2, my S is 1, and my O is 4. Now because we have parentheses, we need to distribute. We have a 3 outside, so that goes to the S, and it goes to the O. So now when I look, I have 3 sulfur, and I have 12 oxygen. Last step, we're going to total. So 2 plus 3 plus 12, we have 17 atoms. If I look, I have 3 elements. So if you always remember to go through the steps, you should not have any problems counting atoms. Identify the elements, look at the subscripts to count the number of atoms of each individual element, and then look for parentheses to distribute anything that is outside the parentheses to everything that's inside the parentheses. We're going to be practicing this over the next few days, so hopefully by the end of the week you will have mastered this.